If you were an ancient samurai general and were tasked with defeating an enemy that outnumbered you 3-1, how would you do it? Well, today's story is an example of one man who did just that. So, if you like ancient Japanese storytelling, you like Japanese folk tales or history, or you just like storytelling in general, please like the video. Please also share and subscribe. I would absolutely love it if we could hit 1,000 subscribers in the next couple of weeks. That would make me so happy. Anyway, I do appreciate the support that has been shown up to this point. You guys are really amazing. And without further ado, Yokoso owashitare, welcome back, and let's get into the actual story for today. Once upon a time, ima wa mukashi, there was a man by the name of Sanekata no Chujo. Sanekata being his name and Chujo being a title. And he was appointed the governor of the province of Michinoku, which was way far in the north and the east part of Japan. And he was such a stalwart and amazing person. He was highborn, he was a nobleman through and through, and he was just a good man. And he was so good and his reputation preceded him so much that when he first arrived at his new station in Michinoku, that everybody welcomed him with a huge feast, and they threw a party for him like they had never thrown for anybody up until that point. But joke's on you, because this guy doesn't actually feature in any part of the rest of the story. For some reason, he's just there in the preamble, like, here's the governor of Michinoku, I guess. Maybe because this story actually does take place mostly in Michinoku. I don't know, but there you go. However, there was another man in Michinoku who is actually important to this story. A man by the name of Taira no Koremochi. And if you watched the previous video, you already know a little bit of who Koremochi is. He was the son of a man by the name of Taira no Kanetada. And Taira no Kanetada was then the governor of the province of Kazusa, but Taira no Kanetada was himself the son of a name by the man of Taira no Shigenari, who was the vice-governor of the province of Musashi, and this Shigenari was the younger brother of Taira no Sadamori, who you will remember as being one of the men who helped put down the rebellion of Taira no Masakado. So for those of you who are just getting here, I apologize for all the names, but essentially what this means is that our main guy, one of the main people that we are focused on, Taira no Koremochi, was descended from a valiant national hero, essentially, a man who put down one of the biggest rebellions in Japanese history. And the thing about Taira no Sadamori, the guy who put the rebellion down, is that he adopted his nephews and the children of his nephews as heirs to his estate, as heirs to his inheritance, I guess you could say. And because Taira no Koremochi, one of the main guys here, was the 15th in line, he was given the name Yogo no Kimi, which just means the 15th lord or something to that effect. So sometimes in this story they do refer to Taira no Koremochi as Yogo, but I'm just going to call him Koremochi just for brevity's sake and so we don't get things confused, because I'm already throwing a bunch of names at you. And I'm about to throw a couple more at you. So, because we have Taira no Koremochi, who is one of the main guys, but then we have another man who plays a very important role in this story, a man by the name of Fujiwara no Moroto. And Fujiwara no Moroto was the grandson of the other man who helped put down the rebellion of Taira no Masakado, Fujiwara no Hidesato. It also does mention that he had the nickname of Sawamata, but again, I'm only going to refer to him as Moroto or Fujiwara no Moroto because we don't need any more names than is already present. But it just so happened that these two men, Taira no Koremochi and Fujiwara no Moroto, had a little bit of a disagreement in regards to some land, some rice fields. And the story doesn't go into depth about what it is, it just says that it was kind of a superfluous problem. But the problem with little problems is that if you leave them unattended, they tend to grow. And whatever the conflict originally was, both men actually had a fairly strong case to be made. And because they couldn't come to an agreement, they then went to the governor and asked him to mediate and figure out a solution for them. The only problem was, they both had equally valid claims, and they both were very strong, independent, and noble men who had very high class and sat very high on the social ladder. And so the governor couldn't come to a conclusion. He couldn't help them figure out whose land this actually was, or maybe it was the boundaries, we don't know. Just that the governor could not help them. And this remained a problem for 3 years, until the governor suddenly passed away. And now, without somebody to mediate the problems between these two men, the problems grew and grew and grew. And they became even more and more angry at each other, and they disagreed more with each other. And to top it off, the servants underneath these two men also began arguing with the other side. And they began telling their own lord all sorts of terrible things about the other guy. And this was really a shame, because these two men, who were both descended from the men who put down the Great Rebellion of Taira no Masakado, before all of this happened were actually really good friends. But, as fate would have it, this disagreement just blew up into something that was beyond fixing. And again, the men serving underneath them certainly didn't help, and they would go to their lords, and they would start saying stuff. And of course, these two men would say, well, I never said anything like that. How dare he say something like that about me? I won't let him get away with this. And the arguments just continued and grew, and things got progressively worse. Until eventually, as it was the way with the warriors in the east, these two men began rallying troops. They started fielding armies. They called in their men from all over the place, and they began sending letters back and forth to each other, determining a time and a place where they would go meet on the field of battle and settle their differences with the bow, with the arrow, and with the sword. And Koremochi gathered about 3,000 men to his cause. A good number, a good strong, solid army. But Moroto only barely managed to get a little over 1,000. And so he was clearly on the back foot in this regard. He was outnumbered 3-1. And because of this, with almost no hope of winning, Moroto decided, you know what, why don't we just stop? How about we not? How about we just not fight? And instead of coming to the appointed place to do battle with Koremochi, he instead hightailed it, and he ran away to the province of Hitachi. And when Koremochi heard this news, he was understandably very, very pumped up. He was excited, and he said something to the effect of, yeah, you see that? There is no way he could have ever hoped to stand against me. Yeah, keep running, you little coward, and don't you forget, you never mess with the Taira. You never mess with Koremochi. And he thumped his chest when he said this, and he let out a big war cry, and he was just stoked because he won an entire battle without even having to fight the battle. The coward ran away without even lifting a finger. Ha! Just goes to show you how powerful and how great of a warrior I am. And a few days passed with Koremochi still fielding his army because, you know, he's got everybody here and you don't know what kind of tricks this guy might pull, so let's hang out here and let's just bide our time for a few days just to make sure that everything is fine. And he did. But the problem again with fielding a big army is they eat a lot and they need care. And their horses need care, their weapons need upkeep, and it is very, very expensive to keep a bunch of warriors in an army. It's not something that you tend to want to do. And so after a few days of the army just kind of hanging around doing nothing, a bunch of the men came to Koremochi and said, you know, sir, I'm more than happy to fight for you, but I do have things at home that I gotta take care of. There are some things that demand my attention and I am responsible for, so with your leave, sir, I would like to head home. And furthermore, some of these men who were telling Koremochi all of these terrible things about Moroto came to him and they said, you know, sir, it's clear that Fujiwara no Moroto really has no interest in fighting a fight that he can't possibly win. And clearly, we outnumber him so heavily. And he has just run away down to Hitachi and down to Shimousa. So there is clearly no way that he is ever going to pose a threat to you ever again. You know what? We've done our duty. Why don't we all just go home? And Moroto, of course, heard this and he thought, you know, you have a point. We did basically win. He can't hope to stand against us. He's clearly a coward. Like, we're fine. Let's just all go home. And he sent everybody back. Said, go take care of your fields. Go take care of your houses. Your duty here is done. And then one day, on the 1st of the 10th month, at around 2 a.m. or so, the hour of the ox, Moroto was asleep at his house, with the few remaining men who were loyal to his army that were still hanging around, when all of a sudden, he woke up to the sound of birds in the distance, making a huge commotion, which was really odd. Birds are not nocturnal, they are awake during the day. And so for birds at 2 a.m. making a ruckus, such a big ruckus that they could hear it from as far away as it was, that was not normal. And Koremochi, hearing this ruckus of birds, instantly woke up and he knew that the only thing that could startle that many birds at night was another army. And he realized that after he had sent his men away, that there was somebody amongst his men, or maybe perhaps who was scouting out the area he was in, and had told Moroto that he had sent all his men back home. And now Moroto was taking this chance to strike. And so Koremochi instantly sprang out of bed, and he began shouting to his men, "Men, there is an army on the way. The birds are making a huge ruckus. Wake up! Grab your bows, grab your arrows, don your armor. You, saddle a horse. You, climb the watchtower." And he began issuing commands left and right. And the whole house suddenly erupted into a flurry of activity. Men going around preparing for war. And after one of the horses got saddled, he instantly told another warrior, "You, go right out and scout ahead and tell me what's happening. Who's coming? How many are there? What direction are they coming from? Give me all the information you can get. Go." And the man did. He instantly ran out on the horse, and he came back not too much longer, and he said, "In a field to the south of here, I couldn't see exactly how many there were. All I know is that the army that is approaching spread about 400 to 500 meters in each direction, all over the field. It was too dark though, but it was a distinct dark blackness that was marching its way towards us." And when Koremochi heard this, his countenance fell, and he became very grim and very grave. And he simply said, "If we are truly being attacked by that many men, then this is it for us. There is no hope. However, we will work together, we will support each other, and we will fight to the bitter end." And thus saying, he then stationed about 4 or 5 warriors at each of the main roads that this enemy army would possibly take to reach them. And he had them set down their shields and plant themselves behind it and prepare for battle. And while he had these defenders out on the roads, he kept in his home with him, both noble and lowborn alike, about 20 men armed with swords and bows and arrows. And he further commanded some of the men, "Since it is unlikely that we will survive this, take my wife, take the women servants, take the children to the mountains behind and hide them there." And whatever servants he commanded to do this did just that. And then the story mentions that the one son that Koremochi did have eventually grew up to become the Saemon Taifu, and was named Shigesada. We won't see any more of him, so don't worry, you don't have to remember that name. And then, with all the preparations being made, then Koremochi took up a bow and some arrows, mounted a horse, and began casually running around the battlefield, I guess looking for a fight. And it was about this time that the enemy forces finally made it to Koremochi's house, and they began attacking. And Koremochi's men did indeed put up a brave resistance. They fought tooth and nail to save themselves, but they were so clearly outnumbered that there was no hope for them. And when the enemy forces arrived, they set fire to all the buildings. However, the men stuck inside couldn't escape because as soon as they left the house, they would immediately be shot down by a hail of arrows. And so all they could do was stay inside and wait. And it didn't take long before daybreak came, and light came into the sky, and now it was very clear to actually see what was going on. And it was also very clear that there was no chance that anyone could escape at this point. Nobody was going to make it past the enemy forces. This was it. And so, all of Koremochi's men were either shot to death or burned alive, and eventually even his house crumbled to the ground. And when the flames had finally died down, Moroto's men came into the ruins. They began looking through, trying to find Koremochi's body. And they looked, and although they recovered about 80 bodies, both of warriors and non-warriors, old men, young men, highborn, lowborn, everybody was so blackened and charred that they couldn't tell anybody apart. But now that daybreak had come, they could clearly see that nobody had a chance of escaping. Nobody had escaped their eyes. And so, even though they couldn't tell which body exactly was Koremochi's, they were very confident that they had got him, that he was one of these people who had burned alive in his own house. And even though about 20 or 30 of Moroto's men had been struck by arrows and had either died or were injured and had to be slung up on their horses so they could move out with the rest of them, these men all returned back to their lord in triumph. Now I say their lord, but their lord was not actually Moroto. Or maybe the warrior's lord was Moroto, but Moroto himself served under another man. And now the original source that I use doesn't actually have his name. I believe that the original characters are either illegible or maybe they have just deteriorated beyond recognition. but another source that I use says that his name was Tachibana no something. I'm not exactly sure how to read this name. I'm guessing it's Tachibana no Sukinori, but I'm not entirely sure, so don't quote me on that. But this man was an older man, but he was also a very wise, a very shrewd, and a very valiant and powerful warrior. He was also very, very high ranking in the social ladder of things. He was a nobleman, and he was so skilled in war that nobody could compare to him. He had no enemies because he had vanquished them all a long time ago. And because of this, he commanded many, many men, many people, and was very, very powerful. And Fujiwara no Moroto had actually taken this man's daughter as his wife, so he was related to this very, very powerful man through marriage. And this was the man that Moroto and his men came to. And because they had been fighting all night long, they were tired and they were hungry. And so they came to this man's home, and Moroto approached him, and they began discussing some things. And as they were talking, Moroto explained how he had attacked Koremochi, how he had locked him inside his house and burned the house down with him inside it. And this man then told Moroto, "Very, very impressive, sir. You did well to destroy him, and doing it in such an unusual manner is worthy of praise. Koremochi is no slouch as a warrior. He's very shrewd and very cunning. I'm assuming you took his head though, and you have it with you. Where is it? Let me see." And Moroto, with a little bit of an arrogant tone in his voice, and maybe with a little bit of hurt pride, because it was common that you took the heads of your enemies as proof that you had slain them. But he simply looked at his brother-in-law and said, "What a weird thing to ask of me, bro. I heard him shouting in his house, giving commands to his men. I know he was there. And I saw him riding around on his horse fighting our men, and we know that nobody escaped. By the time the battle was over, it was clear and it was dawn. We could see everything. Not even a fly could have escaped us. Koremochi's definitely dead. And so why would I have to cut off the head of some dirty, charred corpse to bring it here to prove to you that I killed him? I know that I killed him. There is no room for doubt about this. We won, we got him. What more do you want?" And again, what's very interesting is that even though this man is technically his social superior, Moroto is not speaking to him formally or honorifically at all. So he had a chip on his shoulder. And again, he was probably smarting a little bit from the fact that he wasn't able to take his enemy's head. But this man, Moroto's brother-in-law, listened to this story with a pensive look on his face, not saying anything, just processing what he had heard. And he said, "Indeed. And it makes perfect sense that you would think that. However, I am an old man, and I have seen my fair share of fights and wars in my time, and I would have been very, very convinced if you had indeed brought his head with you, as proof that he was in fact dead. But you didn't do that. And we have no proof that he is actually dead, and that makes me very, very nervous. I know what kind of a man this Koremochi is. And I know that only a fool would underestimate him and think that he is dead with no proof of that. And I am an old man, and I cannot afford to get wrapped up in some war that serves no purpose for me. And so I am not going to be involved with this any further. So please, remove yourself from my premises. Get out of here. I don't want you around here anymore." And when Moroto heard this, he had to stop for a second. I mean, yeah, it made sense that he would get chewed out a little bit for not bringing actual proof of his victory, but he had considered this man almost like a second father for the longest time, and now here he was getting kicked out of his house. This was the brother of his wife. This was his brother-in-law. Bro, why are you so concerned about this? However, this brother-in-law, despite kicking Moroto and his men out, still sent supplies with them, still gave them food and some drink because they hadn't eaten anything all night and they had been marching and they had been fighting, and of course they were tired and they needed some refreshment. And as they were leaving, Moroto began making fun of his brother-in-law under his breath, sarcastically saying that he was indeed a very, very smart guy, that he would be so scared of a man who clearly burned alive in his own house. Seriously. But he had no choice. He couldn't stand against his brother-in-law who was so much more powerful than him, so he and his men left. And when they had gone a good distance, they ended up finding themselves amongst some hills and some nice fields. And it just so happened that there also was a small stream running through this area. Perfect place to stop and rest. And that's exactly what Moroto commanded everybody to do. He said, "Get off your horses, take off your armor, we have some food, we have some drink, we did a good job, we did what we set out to do, let's take a minute to catch our breath. And so they did. Everyone got off their horses. Everyone removed their armor. They took off their weapons. They took off their swords. They unsaddled their horses. They busted out the drinks. They busted out the food. And they began having a big party. And they fed their horses. They unsaddled them. They let their horses get a breather as well. And they tied their horses to the tree with nothing more than a halter on them. Because they had now eaten and drank their fill, because their horses were now relaxed, and because they had been fighting all day, they all immediately fell asleep, and they passed out. They were completely out. It almost seemed as if they had died on the spot. But, of course, they were just tired. And this is where we're going to end this part of the story for now, but the story is not over. I apologize for this video being as long as it is. Honestly, I was wondering if I should break this up into 3 parts, but quite frankly, this is a brilliant place to end it, because we will see in the next video that this fight is not over. But if you want to know more about that, please subscribe so you can be aware when that video comes out, because the ending to this is actually really interesting, and hopefully you'll stick around. But again, if you liked this story, please like the video, please subscribe to the channel, please share with all your weeb friends. Again, I am hoping that we can make it to 1,000 subscribers in the next couple of weeks before I hit my year mark. That would be amazing. But if you have been listening up to this point, I am very grateful for you and for your support. Ito kateji ke no koso haberi kere. And yeah, we will end it there. See you next week for the conclusion of this epic war tale. Goodbye.